Well, great to see everybody. I hope you're having a good afternoon. I'm in a different place. That's why and the internet here for some reason today has been a little spotty. So at any point during the class, actually, I'm gonna make Victor a co-host in case I drop out, we don't lose the class. Victor will keep the class open until I can get back in. So hopefully I will not. But if I freeze or you can't hear me, certainly as you all did at the beginning of class, put it in the chat and let me know. So before we dive into the work that we're going to do today, I want to talk about the rest of the semester and some of the work and the catching up that I have to do and the stuff that is going to be left for you to do. So at this point, there's going to just be one, the essays that we're looking at right now, the two essays are going to be um, the, Talk to Teachers and Ain't I Woman speech that I had you look at and we'll look at together today are gonna is the last two pieces that we're gonna look at for which you need to write an essay. And that will be your final formal essay for the semester. So your three formal essays with a VIP essay, the Google essay, which I've graded most of, but haven't even sent any of them to you. I've graded Nahome and Joshua and most of the people. I just have to email them to you. Um, and then the third one will be this essay, the essay that's going to be pulling out information from both. Well, let me rewind. There is the Google essay, the VIP essay, and the Jesmyn Ward essay that I'm moving the due date from this Thursday to Sunday. All right, and then you will have this last essay that will be your last essay for the semester. Um, of the smaller assignments, I'm gonna send you a chart so you know which assignments and what percentage, and then um, my plan is that all of those assignments will not only be commented on, but be graded, so we have a sense of where you are, what you want to revise for the second part of the semester. Next week, for next Tuesday, there will not be, other than that you just have this essay due, and then in 2 weeks, you will have the we'll work through these essays today, these speeches today, and then we'll have the final assignment for that. And then the last thing is a research project, which is not necessarily a research paper, which is going to be for you to compile an annotated bibliography. And it's going to be of some of the works that we've looked at in class, and an annotated bibliography. I'll explain that later on, but it's really both a format and a summarizing exercise. There's a research component, so we're gonna go over a how to do some research, and I will give you that instruction. We'll go over that next week. But basically, after we have one essay due this week, an essay due in a couple weeks, and then the annotated, and those will be the last three assignments for the semester. And then we will have a final exam, which is a final exam that happens that all the English 100 classes are taking together. And for that final exam, I'm just going to explain that a little bit. There will be a work that the department will choose, will come in. I will teach that work to you the way we've discussed all the other works we've done, any of the other essays. You'll read it, we'll discuss it. We'll read it, we'll discuss it, and then our last class together, I think it's in a month, is on December 7th is the last class that we will have together. So we have left for the semester after today, we have 4 classes. So after that, then so we'll be working on if I get the final exam materials, my plan is to begin discussing them and working on them on the 30th, so that we have the last 2 times we're together. We have time to look through the final exam, and on December 7th, you'll have any questions you can. So basically, the way the final exam will work is we will read a text together. You will get a prompt for that, and then you have finals week to work on that prompt. So I think the prompt doesn't get released, I think, until I have to get the date, but I think the date of the prompt gets released is on the 14th or the 15th. So December 14th, 15th, you will go to Blackboard, the question, the prompt will be there, and then you will have 1 week to answer it, okay? So, so that's how the final exam will work. What we're gonna do between this week and next week, we're gonna work on this last essay, and then we're gonna also do, so you'll get also by next class, by the 16th, you'll get a chart, right? And then this will it'll show you if you're missing an assignment, if you're what the grades are, because everything will be graded, and then you'll have a sense of what you need to do between the 16th and the 7th to either turn in an assignment that needs to be graded or turn in, you know, any missing work. And or if you got a grade that you want to work on a revision, then the semester, the last couple weeks will be giving you time and space. It won't be like assignment or reading heavy, because you'll be using that time to clean it up and get it ready for the end of the semester. So that's what the next couple of weeks are. So today and we're going to go over the essays, the talk to teachers, and the speech "Ain't I a Woman?" And that'll prep us for the final essay of the class. And then next week we'll talk about research, and I'll set you up for the research project, and that will be due. The talk to teachers essay is not going to be due until the 28th, and the but right on the heels, I'm sorry, on the 21st. And then the 28th is the research, the annotated bibliography. And that'll be your last assignment. Then we'll meet, we'll prepare for the final exam, and then the final exam will be due whenever we get the dates. But I think that will be due on, I think it's close to Christmas. We also, I think it's the 21st or the 22nd is when the final exam will be, you'll do. So you'll get the information on the 14th. You'll have a whole week to write the essay and submit it. The final exam will be an essay. Right? And that will be it for the semester. So I will also, before I say any questions, I also will send that in an email. I'll send an email with the grade breakdown on the assignments, so that way you can go into Blackboard and make sure that you've done the assignments that are being graded, and that your essays are being graded. And then next class, you'll just get a little chart showing, you know, what you've completed, so that way we're on the same page and you have an opportunity to make up any assignments that are missing, so that as we go into the semester and the grading, that we're both on the same page. So we'll do that. All right, any questions? No?
Yes, yes, Professor. You mentioned that this this Thursday you moved the assignment from this Thursday to Sunday.
Yes, the deadline.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for saying that again. So the final test is an essay. Yes, David. So the final exam, the final test is an essay. And we don't know the text for that essay yet. It hasn't been given to me. But when I do, once I have it, then I'll put it on Blackboard. We'll talk about it in class. It's kind of like what we've been doing all semester and what we're going to be doing now. How many pages tomorrow? Okay. What are you afraid of, Miguel?
No, I mean, SS is not my thing, but I always try to do my best.
Yeah, you did a good job. Yes, and Nahom, correct. So the only thing, the essay that says November 11th, that's the only thing that's due, and it'll be due instead of November 11th, it'll be November 14th. Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think Victor's making a point of finals week because then suddenly you have finals from all your classes in the same week. Um, but yeah, we'll pace. I mean, I know they don't release the prompt um until finals week, and because of the way our class works, this year the semester ends on a Monday, so that's why our week, in a way, we end on the 7th. I mean, we're grateful we had the 14th to have one more class together, but that's how the semester works. So but definitely between the 7th and finals week, I think one of the things that Victor is putting in the chat is about just kind of the writing center still available. um, and Victor, I don't think once semester ends the writing center is still available, right? They can't really get support for the final exam, right?
So we may, depending on how finals week is looking, sometimes we schedule 1 week during finals where we do meet with students. But that's also very dependent on how people's hours look and if um managers and whatnot are wanting to do that.
Mhm. Okay,
But I
well,
would
you'll
just
keep
suggest we
you.
all plan ahead too. Just it's good to not to worry last minute.
Yeah, which is part of the reason why I'm just getting the assignments. We're lining them up and trying to get them all finalized so that we could do that. I'm having a thought in my head, but I'm gonna hold that thought for a minute. Um, yes, I'm gonna hold it for a minute. Um, but yeah, so that's why we try. Also, that's why we're having this discussion now, so we can kind of plan the rest of the semester and know what needs to happen. And there'll be like a week or so that there won't be um, the the assignments are kind of lining up, but you'll have a sense of what you need to do, what you're missing, and there's going to be space. I'm going to tell you that there will be space for you to get work and catch up. So I want you. Fear is okay. You can feel it, but also understand that there's as Victor's saying, planning is important. I always say, just as a general thing, whenever like very often I need to give a talk about something, and whether it's a topic that I'm interested in or something that I have written about, and whenever I'm going to speak, the best way, the thing that helps me calm down the most, is being prepared. If I know what I'm going to talk about, if I know what I'm going to, if I know what's up, then I'm prepared. I feel the most calm. So that's the attempt. The attempt is to talk about all this, not to scare you, but so that you can prepare. And it's okay. And if you get scared by it, it's okay, because it's a lot. And it's a lot because I know this is one class of many classes that you may be taking, and work and families and all that. But yeah, but understand that I'm also here to help the best I can. So we're going to work a little backward today. I think I'm going to start with the A9 woman speech, and then we'll go over to a talk to teachers. And that's what we will do today, just to kind of examine that. So with the Ain't I a Woman speech, any reactions, any thoughts, any feedback?
Well, from what I understood, it's like she's trying to talk about the equality of men and women. Like she said, like men has more rights than women.
Mhm.
Also about the color skin, like how woman gets treated instead of white woman,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Yeah.
Mhm. Great, thanks, Miguel. Yeah, anyone else? I mean, I think Miguel did a pretty good job of of summarizing what the main point of the speech is. But let's speak a little bit about Sojourner Truth, right? That's the writer of the speech, Sojourner Truth, right? And so let me share my screen so we could see something from biography on her. Um, National Women's History Museum. Let me share screen. So here we have the dates that she was born, 1797 to 1883, right? So she passed away a very, very long time ago, right? I would say like maybe 150 years ago almost, right? Um, and she lived a long life, right? She lived to be 86 years old. And here she was it says she was a former slave, right? She became an outspoken advocate for abolition. Abolition is people that wanted to abolish, to get rid of slavery, right? So she became a outspoken person advocate for abolition, for temperance, right? To being even and not violence, non-violence, like so civil rights and women's rights, right? In the 19th century. Her Civil War work earned her an invitation to meet President Abraham Lincoln in 1864. So, her Sojourner Truth is a name that she took on when she was born Isabella Baumfree, a slave in Dutch-speaking Ulster County in New York in 1797. She was bought and sold 4 times and subjected to harsh physical labor and violent punishments. In her teens, she was united with another slave with whom she had 5 children beginning in 1815. And in 1827, a year before New York's law freeing slaves was to take effect, Truth ran away with her infant Sophia to a nearby abolitionist family. So what's interesting about Sojourner Truth's story is because there's this idea of sometimes that between, as we're reading the works of Jesmyn Ward and the work of Carolyn White, Carol White, there's this idea that the slavery was in the South, and we know that slavery was all over the United States. It's just that the North took it out or abolished it sooner. And so, but before it was abolished, so a lot of the free slaves lived in the North and had an impact. And so, Sojourner Truth has that history with slavery, right? But then, I'm moving down here. So then there were other folks that, other leaders, William Lloyd Garrison and Frederick Douglass, and those of us who live in Harlem know that there's an avenue named after Frederick Douglass. But Frederick Douglass was a writer, a thinker, wrote important papers, and so they inspired Truth to give speeches and to talk about the evils of slavery. And she was not just speaking about it from a kind of rhetorical. She experienced it, right? She experienced a lot of hardship. She experienced separation of family and children, many things that she suffered in her lifetime. But she also there were at the same time in the 1800s, there was a rise of women's rights. And so she was involved in that too. So she was both involved in civil rights and in women's rights, right? And so then the speech that she gave, A9 Women, was in 1851, and it was a lecture that included Women's Rights Conference in Ohio. And her speech, A9 Woman, is from that talk. And it became kind of like this anthem, right? And so we're gonna, anthem meaning like not a song, but like this idea of that kind of like a common understanding that women were having in general and Black women were having specifically around rights. And so, it became a very important speech, and many people besides you through the years read the speech and comment on it. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Sojourner Truth, and while we're here, let's go into the discussions. 1 second. Here we go. And yeah, I'll go to this. So let's just together. Whoops. This makes me crazy. Sorry about commercials. Okay. So let me know if you can't hear it, okay?
I can't hear him.
Yeah, I can't hear it either. Yeah, okay.
history.
Can you hear it now?
Well, children,
Yes, we can.
where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the white man gonna be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? Helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles.
We're having some disconnectivity and like some static.
Okay.
Or over mud puddles, or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as any man when I could get it. And I could bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, seen most sold off into slavery. And when I cried out with a mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? And they talk about this thing in the head. What is it they call it? Oh, that's right, yeah, intellect. That's it, honey. Well, what's that got to do with women's rights and Negroes' rights? If my cup won't hold but a pint and yours holds a quart, wouldn't you be mean not to let me have my little half measure full? That man in the back there, he says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. Well, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? He came from God and a woman. Man didn't have nothing to do with it. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, well, these women here together ought to be able to turn it back and get it right side up again. And they asking to do it. The men better let them.
So let's say you have to read an incredibly
Okay. So hopefully you heard it because I didn't hear complaints the second half. Yes. Can you hear me? Okay, good. Thank you. Thanks for letting me know. Okay. Good. Yeah, and we'll look at it. I wanted us to hear the actress Kerry Washington read it because she was giving it some more. I mean, it's a speech, so it's different to read a speech than to see it, and she was dramatizing it, right? And she's pointing out because apparently there's a big hall where Sojourner Truth is giving the speech. But I think one of the things that Miguel said at the beginning of class when I asked any reaction, she was speaking about the rights of women. So she was making this comparison right at the beginning. She was saying things like, let me just actually get the speech up so that the version that we had in the chat. Right, so she begins at the beginning, right? She goes, there's so much racket, right? Something must be going on, right? She says, there's all this talk about rights. And he says that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages, lifted over ditches, and to have the best place everywhere, right? She says, let me share my screen so you can see, you can follow along as well. Right? She says here, right, in this part, right? She goes, that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. And then she goes, well, nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. It's unstable, it's always unstable. She goes, and ain't I a woman? She goes, look at me, look at my arms, right? So she's making this comparison, right, with what society, her society at the time is saying, this is what a woman is. Like they should be treated this way and treated that way. And she's like, and ain't I a woman, right? So she's making this distinction at the beginning between what kind of woman is that man talking about and her, because she's a woman and she's not getting that kind of treatment, right? And so we know that she's speaking about her blackness in that sense. Later on in the speech, she goes on to talk about that section there when she talks about you know, the section where she's talking about toward the end, when she says that little man in black there says women can't have as much rights as men because Christ wasn't a woman. She goes, where did your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man had nothing to do with it, right? So she's again elevating in that sense the importance of women and the role that women are playing. So so it's a small speech. It's just a page long, you know, but it's powerful in that she's making this parallel, right? Both between herself as a woman and also the idea of herself as a Black woman, right? So on the one hand, there's a term for that we call today. There's a term called intersectionality, like intersectional, when things cross, right? Um, so so in terms of like in terms of the history of oppression in America and in the world, right? There's this idea of this sense, right, of inequality between men and women. So let's just stick with that idea, right? That men are smarter, men are better, men are stronger, right? And we've learned over time that that um, that many of that is not true. That women could be as strong or just as strong or even stronger. That women can be smarter. That women can, all those things, right? But but what do you think when she says in the moment in her speech, right? So there's this idea. So let's like we're now in 2021. We've learned some stuff. We understand some things that are different. Sojourner Truth helped the world to see that. Next person, James Baldwin, did their part too. So we're smarter now, but we're looking at the argument that she's making, right? She's making the argument that that if you say that this is what a woman is, right, that she should be treated well, and you don't treat me well, then there's something that doesn't match, right? And what doesn't, then I should be treated just as well, right? Let's just agree. I agree with that part. And then there's a moment when she says, what is that thing they're talking about? Like intellect, right? Let me share my screen again. We can see that. She goes, then they talk about this thing in the head. What does they call it? Somebody says, intellect. That's it, honey. What's that got to do with a woman's rights or Negroes' rights? Right? What is that intellect? She goes, what does that have to do with women's rights and Negroes' rights? Right? To say, even if someone is intellectual, right? If somebody is smarter, right? Let's just say, yes. What does that have to do with the rights, right? What does it have to do with respect? What does it have to do with the rights of you to be able to live freely and be freely in this world, right? Or in this country? Let's just make it specific to the country that she's talking about, our country, the country that we're in, right? So she's kind of breaking down this argument. She goes, if you want, in certain ways, women should be treated like this, then you need to treat me that way, right? You try to use an argument that intellect is something that evaluates humanity. I disagree. What does that have to do, right? And then she talks about the idea of like men being superior in a sense, and one reason religion might be the reason some people will use, and she kind of knocks that argument down as well, right? So she systematically and very simply, from a very straightforward point of view, gives us examples of the idea that we talk about now of inequality. That things are not equal. And she said, and to be honest, in the world, in our society, in the U.S., in New York City, in the Bronx, if you think about economically, there is not equality, right? There are people that make more money, there are people that make less money. And then if you follow some politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, one of the things she's trying to fight from within the system, she's trying to fight for more equality, right? And people talk about economic equality, right? And so, but then she says in the speech that she, not AOC, Sojourner Truth, says, if you have a quart and I have a pint, wouldn't it be unfair for you to not just let me have my pint, even that, right? To try to keep that from me. So, so that's one of the challenges that she's bringing up in the speech. She's showing all these ideas, all these arguments that that people were believing to make women separate or women lesser, to oppress women, and specifically, to oppress her as a Black woman. Then she was kind of knocking down all of those arguments, like taking them apart, right? And so in a way, hopefully, I think that makes sense to you, because we're living in 2021 and we've learned a lot since 1864, when she delivered that speech, which is like almost 160 years ago, right? When she was making these arguments to a big crowd. And the speech got printed and it went viral. And, so in a sense, viral Not like nowadays that you put it on, she could post it now and it can, that's a different level of viral, but that other people were able to hear it and read it. So that was, so that's the kind of arguments that she's making inside of this tiny speech, right? It begins with like, if you are looking at women in a particular way, you're not treating me that way. If you're using arguments about superiority and you want to even try to use religion or intellect to say that that makes you superior, I disagree. That doesn't make you superior. And and um, and that and she's also making the distinction between herself as a Black woman as opposed to only being a woman. She's also a Black woman, so she experiences oppression from two levels, both as a woman and both as a Black person. And so that's the idea of being intersectional, like both those ideas inside of her piece. What do you think about what I'm saying? You agree, you disagree, you see it in it, it was obvious to you. What are your thoughts? And you could chat it, unmute it. Thanks, David. All right, hold one quick second. Okay, thank you. Um, let's see, I'm checking the chat out. Okay. Okay, the God part was new. The way she mentioned it. Okay. In all honesty, what she said is pretty agreeable, especially when she pulled out the whole God part, right? Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty interesting, the argument that she makes, right? And I mean, if you believe that, I mean, that's the story, right? The story of um of Jesus is that, you know, it was God and a woman that created him. She makes another reference to the Bible, right, where she talks about if one woman can turn the world all upside down. She's making the reference to Eve. So she's speaking to a particular audience, right, and a particular idea at that time, right? And she's taking the arguments, right? It's almost like if she was doing a debate. Whenever you do a debate, you think about like what your opponent is going to their position, and you figure out what they're going to say, and you kind of counter it, right? Or you find the argument against it, or the argument to support your idea over it. So in a way, she was using that technique. And again, you have to think this is a woman that grew up as a slave. It took her a while before she had the opportunity to become educated and to learn to write and read, and to be able to uh, but clearly the way she thought, right? That's what you call a person that has vision, right? The way she was thinking was was different, right? Was going across against what society was thinking of her. And I want to use that thought of thinking differently to help us as an entryway into James Baldwin's talk to teachers. Now that's a much longer speech, and this is also a speech. So I do these two together, right? Sojourner Truth was speaking to a group of women, right, and men, but at a women's conference. Okay. Cool, Ariel. Just follow the best you can. That's fine. but as an entry point into James Baldwin. So, so let me speak to you a little bit about James Baldwin. So he also, oh no, let me just share on my screen in a moment, but James Baldwin also is an American writer and a thinker, right? And I say that and a thinker because it's, you know, not that we all think, right? We're all people who think, but I'm talking about thinkers are people that kind of contemplate, I think, the human condition and figure out that they have to do something different about it, right? And they want to introduce different ideas, and those ideas sometimes help us expand and grow, like as a society and as a group of people. So hold 1 second. I wanted to play clip, but I'm trying to be. All right, I think I'm just gonna do. I'll let us hear it. So I wanted you. So let me just rewind. So the entry point into James Baldwin. So James Baldwin was an American writer and thinker. He wrote novels, and so one novel that was famous for was one called Giovanni's Room. Another one he was called Another Country, and very often he dealt with race in his writing. Giovanni's Room. James Baldwin was also a gay man, and in Giovanni's Room he dealt with. It's a gay story, but it's a gay story that the writers are the protagonists, the characters are all white. And it was because James Baldwin said he was having trouble, I'm going to use the word, he didn't use this word, with the intersectionality, with the mixing of being queer and being Black. So he just dealt with the Black or with the queer, but never rarely at the same time. So, so he wrote many essays and wrote many books and became a civil rights leader. And we all know Martin Luther King, and we know Malcolm X, and we know many others who rose up to be leaders and icons. But James Baldwin was there as well, right? Writing. And the segue I'm making from him, from Sojourner Truth to him, is that society also had a way of looking at him as a Black man when he said, I don't agree with you, right? And he's provocative, right? In the sense that for us it's provocative, right? Maybe to use the word, like he basically says, that in the essay, we'll look at it. He basically says that you call me a nigger, right? And your idea of what a nigger is, those things, that's not me. I'm not any of the things that you say that I am. So if you say that, and I'm living proof that that description is untrue, then there's something that's disconnected, there's something that's wrong. And actually, what's wrong has nothing to do with me, but has something to do with you. You who created that idea, you who created that definition, and in many ways imposed that idea on me, right? And there must be a reason why you did that, right? And I know the reason, right? So he goes at, but it's the idea of him being seen or us being seen, and we can take this from Sojourner Truth as a woman, the idea of being seen as a Black woman. We could take it today to being an immigrant, to being even a poor working class person, right? I come from a poor working class background. I grew up in the projects in Soundview. There's an idea of people, you know, like me who comes that are supposed to be a particular kind of way, an expectation, a particular fate that I'm supposed to have, right? But if there's living proof that counters that disrupts that single story of who we are, then that creates the possibility. And so in a way, James Baldwin is disrupting the single story, right, of the Black man as a nigger of his time. He's saying he's disrupting it, right? And so he's doing that in A Talk to Teachers. So we don't have the opportunity of footage of seeing Sojourner Truth speak, but we do have the opportunity of seeing James Baldwin speak. And so what I wanted to do is show a clip. I was trying to have this smaller clip in mind, but I think it might be good for us to see him move and talk and defend himself. And very often, James Baldwin felt like he needed to be in the rooms of the boardrooms, on television, and in every space that he felt that white people inhabited. He felt, I need to be there to say what I need to say, because I can speak to Black people, of course, but I want to speak to a bigger audience. I want to speak to everyone. So I want to just show a clip of him so we can get to see him moving and talking and talking about himself and his positions on it. And so this is a TV show that used to exist back in, I think, the 60s and 70s. This is an episode from 1968. There's a gentleman named Dick Cavett who was on television for many, many, many years, and he interviewed people. And so we're just gonna hear this. Let me just go back to stop sharing. So when I share it, I think I have to make sure I click share sound. Okay, good.
Someone to our group here. Professor Paul Weiss, a Sterling Professor of Philosophy at Yale. Were you able to listen to the show backstage?
I heard a good deal of it, but then I was behind the rostrum.
Yes.
So I heard only some of it.
Did you hear anything that you disagreed with?
I disagreed with a great deal of it. And of course, there's a good deal I agree with. But I think he's overlooking one very important matter, I think. Each one of us, I think, is terribly alone. He lives his own individual life. He has all kinds of obstacles in the way of religion or color or size or shape or lack of ability. And the problem is to become a man.
Well, what I was discussing was not that problem, really. I was discussing the difficulties, the obstacles, the very real danger of death thrown up by the society when a Black man attempts to become a man.
All this emphasis upon Black man and white does emphasize something which is here, but it emphasizes it or perhaps exaggerates it, and therefore makes us put people together in groups which they ought not to be in. I have more in common with a Black scholar than I have with a white man who's against scholarship. And you have more in common with a white author than you have with someone who's against all literature. So why must we always concentrate on color or on religion or this? There are other ways of connecting men.
I'll tell you this. When I left this country in 1948, I left this country for one reason only, one reason. I didn't care where I went. I might have gone to Hong Kong, I might have gone to Timbuktu. I ended up in Paris, on the streets of Paris, with $40 in my pocket on the theory that nothing worse could happen to me there than had already happened to me here. You talk about making it as a writer by yourself. You had to be able then to turn off all the antenna with which you live, because once you turn your back on this society, you may die. You may die. And it's very hard to sit at a typewriter and concentrate on that if you're afraid of the world around you. The years I lived in Paris did one thing for me. They released me from that particular social terror, which was not the paranoia of my own mind, but a real social danger visible in the face of every cop, every boss, everybody. I don't know what most white people in this country feel, but I can only conclude what they feel from the state of their institutions. I don't know if white Christians hate Negroes or not, but I know that we have a Christian church which is white and a Christian church which is black. I know, as Malcolm X once put it, that the most segregated hour in American life is high noon on Sunday. That says a great deal for me about a Christian nation. It means that I can't afford to trust most white Christians and certainly cannot trust the Christian church. I don't know whether the labor unions and their bosses really hate me. That doesn't matter, but I know I'm not in their unions. I don't know if the real estate lobby is anything against black people, but I know the real estate lobbies keep me in the ghetto. I don't know if the Board of Education hates black people, but I know the textbooks they give my children to read and the schools that we have to go to. Now, this is the evidence. You want me to make an act of faith, risking myself, my wife, my woman, my sister, my children, on some idealism which you assure me exists in America, which I have never seen.
I never said that.
So I wanted you all just to see James Baldwin in action in his speaking. And in that speech, I'll just speak a little bit about it and then we'll go to the text from the class. But in that speech, you know, he's moving from the idea of, he's talking about his lived experience, right? He's talking about his experience living in the country. And we can talk about, you know, I think a lot of times I get nervous myself because I was like, here we are, and there's always progress. But I think we can talk about the progress, and that's wonderful. We can celebrate it. But you know, many of the things that he talks about are still many of the issues that we face. And so yes, there's progress, but there's still a lot of opportunities, or still a lot of opportunities that are not available, right? And so if you can talk about equality, you can talk about being equal, we have to talk about how we're seen as people, right? And so going back to Sojourner Truth, how is she seen, right? How is she seen as a woman? How is she seen as a Black woman in that particular society? And although there's been a lot of change since the time that she was seeing, there's still some of the things that she's talking about echo today. And so let's turn our attention to the James Baldwin text that I asked you all to read, which is a talk to teachers. And in that case, in that speech, he was talking to teachers. It's another example of a speech, right? And he was talking to a group of professors and teachers. And one second, let me just see. Just let me get the speech up, open in my. And you know, and to all of you, I'll just say I applaud you. I mean, I was looking at the responses, right? And let me just actually share a couple of the responses from your responses on it, just as we're talking in general, right? So one response to all of it was that the talks about the discrimination of Black lives and how they should have the rights to believe in what they want to, but instead they have doors shut in their faces because of the color of the skin. Baldwin also discusses that Negroes were brought to this country for cheap labor for the Americans and they're indispensable. And once that Negro child found out his self-worth, he knew he wasn't an animal, no more than he's a man that needs to fight for all Black lives that are out there, right? So the kind of repositioning and reconnecting of that position. Hold 1 second. So another of your classmates most of the talk was about how the education system should do better. Speaks about how society depends on certain things that people tend to take advantage of. He addresses that the Black community doesn't get respected, that they don't seem to have the best opportunity in education. They won't allow them to progress towards the education. The point that they fought for the justice of Black youth to get the same respect in the school system. Right. Response. I'm reading from the responses from the assignment. This is right. It talks about how Black people are not getting treated fairly just because of the color of their skin, and they get treated unfairly, and that is not right. Once the child realized that he is just like everyone else, besides his skin color, he decided to stand up for all Black lives, because at the end of the day, everyone is human. Everyone deserves to get treated equally, and no one should get treated, mistreated just because of the color of their skin. Is not only at one specific place in school, but as well, and you're supposed to feel safe and respected at school. Right. In the beginning of the speech, we'll take a look at the elements of the speech, and I think I just want to read one more response that all of you had. Good responses, by the way. So Baldwin examines the purpose of education, the role that educated people play in accomplishing that purpose. Baldwin states that the real purpose of education is to prepare a person to examine the world and society in which one lives, and then make decisions by his or herself. So much of this education comes from our experiences and observations of the world around us. Baldwin explains how different the world views for Black child compared to a white child in the same age. Black children very quickly become conscious of the inequalities that they face, such as their living conditions, the type of jobs available to their parents, and the need to sit at the back of the bus during that time period. But these circumstances teach Black children that the education system, government, churches are present to only benefit others and not benefit of Black Americans. As a result, many Black children grow up living a life of crime, and they long for the day when the society in which they live perishes. Black children must stand up for themselves, realize that they are not animals or the harsh words that white people's American history see them as. Once they believe that more than that, power and identity is taken from the whites. Educated people have a responsibility to work on changing the society. Black children need to be taught young how to fight to the conspiracies that are against them, and that the images seen in pop culture are just fantasies and not reality. For the sake of America's future, Black children must be taught to appropriately channel their energy and potential despite severe critics and obstacles they face. I wanted to share that one because that encapsulated a lot of the big points inside of the article. Some of you did a good job with the broad strokes. There's a lot of dense text Baldwin doesn't write in a way that sometimes I have to myself also read it very slowly to be able to stay with the ideas that he's espousing. But I'm going to read a little bit and read different sections of it. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm more interested in looking at certain parts. And I thought that all of you, those of you who responded, did a really good job with being able to identify things. But he starts with, let's begin by saying that we're living through very dangerous times. Everyone in this room is in one way or another aware of that. We are in a revolutionary situation, no matter how unpopular that word has become in this country, right? So he's talking about that particular time, and he goes through and talks about several things that happens, right? And so here to the end, this next paragraph, so I'm talking to school teachers, I'm not a teacher myself. In some ways, I'm fairly easily intimidated. I beg you to let me leave that and go back to what I think to be the entire purpose of education in the first place. And in the last summary, that's what we're talking about, like the purpose of education. It seemed to me that if a child were born, if I was a child's parent, is my obligation and my high duty to civilize that child. Man is a social animal. He cannot exist without society. Right, talking about how we all right now, even though we're in Zoom lands, we are in a society, we are in a group together. And there is a group dynamic that happens when we go back into the classroom, when you step out of your houses. We live in a world and in a society, and we could feel, you know, how we can feel that sense of how we're treated in one way or another. I want to go back to the first page for a minute. So what he says here, So any citizen of this country who figures himself as responsible, that's here, and particularly those who do not, who deal with the minds and hearts of our young people, must be prepared to go for broke, right? He's talking to the teachers. I'll put it another way, you must understand that in an attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty, when it is operating not only in the classroom, but in society, you will meet the most fantastic, the most brutal, and the most determined resistance. There's no point in pretending that this won't happen. So he's saying to teachers, you're charged with taking care of and educating young people, and you need to go for broke. And the term go for broke, what is, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. What does it mean to go for broke? When somebody says, go for broke. Does anybody know what the phrase means? Yeah.
Professor, I think this is Ariel. I think as far like with that phrase is like basically like I have nothing, like not just have nothing, but like I'm like not having nothing, but still having like myself
Mhm,
in that aspect. Like I'm going for broke, but I have myself.
mhm. Right. And going for broke means you're going to go for it. Like you almost have uh, nothing to lose. Go all in on one thing. Yes. Right. So he's saying what Ariel says, I have myself, I have my focus, I'm going to go all in on this thing. So he's talking, and that phrase, we know, most of us know that phrase, we heard that. So we know who he's talking to. He's talking to his people, to us, to people to saying, go for broke, right? That if you're going to be in a classroom and you're going to be teaching young people, you better go for broke. You better give them the real deal, and give them and teach them that, right? Go for it. So he's speaking to that particular idea. And then he says, as one of your classmates wrote in their observation, that he's talking about like the purpose of education. So yeah, so you're here to learn how to write, right? Not learn how to write, you know how to write when you come in, but learn how to organize your thoughts, learn how to construct an essay. You're doing that. If you're taking psychology classes, you're delving deeper into how the mind works. If you're taking nursing classes, you're learning about the body, how to take care of people, right? So you can apply these things to a profession. That if you're learning your math classes, you're learning not only mathematics, but like it's also, affecting and developing your brain. We read the articles, Google Making Us Stupid and How to Get Our Minds to Read, because there is a connection between the activity we do and the development of our brains, right? That our brains are not like this static organ, that it's one that could be developed. And depending on the things that we do, our minds become more developed, right? There's a sense that a word that goes today, talk about being woke. When this says somebody's woke, woke means just like you're awake, that you realize something, that there is some understanding around an issue, an idea, something that you have some understanding, you have come to, right? So going back to the essay, right, he's talking about the purpose of education is that. So yes, on the one hand, that we're learning skills and we're learning lots of things, but the idea also is that we can become deeper thinkers and more critical thinkers, right? So that we're able to discern and make different decisions for ourselves based on information and fact, and that you know where to get it, right? So let me go back to sharing my screen and back to the essay. Okay. That's this section, right? But he's talking about here. And yes, he's I'm going to read from this part. Now, if what I have tried to sketch has any validity, it becomes thoroughly clear, at least to me, that any Negro who is born in this country and undergoes the American educational system runs the risk of becoming schizophrenic, right? Schizophrenic is a psychological term, but like having almost different personalities. On the one hand, he's born in the shadow of the stars and stripes, and he is assured it represents a nation which has never lost a war. He pledges allegiance to that flag which guarantees liberty and justice for all. He is part of a country in which anyone can become president, and so forth. But on the other hand, he is also assured by his country and his countrymen that he has never contributed anything to civilization. That his past is nothing more than a record of humiliations gladly endured. He is assumed to be to the republic that he, his father, his mother, and his ancestors were happy, shiftless, watermelon-eating darkies who loved Mr. Charlie and Miss Anne, and that a value he has as a black man is proven by only one thing, his devotion to white people. Right? He's talking about the duality of growing up, saying in a country that says liberty and justice for all, and I'm just going to say a summary of this little section is like, but then not really experiencing that liberty and justice, right? Because we know the justice system is not equal, and the fact that there's still such a huge difference between wealth in this country, like who has the wealth, and if you look at the racial division, that that the number of people who live in poverty and who are wealthy, there is a big difference. So he says all this, like, kids are not silly. They this plays on their consciousness, and as adults, we're fooled. We're anxious to be fooled, right? I just want to move to here. He's talking about just like that, the consciousness, we're saying of this idea of duality, liberty and justice for all, and then not experiencing it. So he says here, let us say that the child is 7 years old. I'm right in the middle of the page here, and I am his father, and I decide to take him to the zoo, or to Madison Square Garden, or to the UN building, or to any of the tremendous monuments we find all over New York. We get into a bus and we go from where I live on 131st Street and 7th Avenue downtown through the park, and we get to New York City, which is not Harlem, right? The New York City, which is not Harlem. Now, where the boy lives, even if it is a housing project, it is an undesirable neighborhood. If he lives in one of those housing projects of which everyone in New York is so proud, he has at the front door, if not closer, the pimps, the whores, the junkies, in a word, the danger of life in the ghetto. And the child knows this, though he doesn't know why, right? I still remember my first sight of New York. It was really another city where I was born. We looked down over Park Avenue streetcars. It was Park Avenue, but I didn't know what Park Avenue meant downtown. The Park Avenue I grew up on, which is still standing, is dark and dirty. No one would dream of opening a Tiffany's on that Park Avenue. And when you go down, downtown, you discover that you're literally in a white world. It is rich, or at least it looks rich. It is clean because they collect garbage downtown. There are doormen. People walk about as though they owned where they are, and indeed they do. And it's a great shock. It's very hard to relate yourself to this. You don't know what it means. You know instinctively that none of this is for you. You know this before you are told who it is for, and who is paying for it, and why it isn't for you, right? So he's talking about the idea of liberty and justice for all, that this is an ideal in America, but he's saying his experience, right? Very often the experience of the Black person is not liberty and justice for all. You can see the difference of the neighborhoods in which he grew up in, Harlem at that time, and when he took just a bus downtown, 25 blocks, 30 blocks, 100 blocks downtown, it was a different story, right? So the summary talks about kind of like the way, again, we're talking about the way in which the society, right, is viewing himself. He's talking about himself in his position as a Black person, as a Black man. He says the point of all this, I'm reading this paragraph, is that Black men were brought here as a source of cheap labor. He's referring to, of course, slavery. They were indispensable to the economy. In order to justify the fact that men were treated as though they were animals, the white republic had to brainwash itself into believing that they were indeed animals and deserved to be treated like animals. Therefore, it is almost impossible for any Negro child to discover anything about his actual history. The reason is that this animal, he puts in quotations, once he suspects his own worth, once he starts believing that he is a man, has begun to attack the entire power structure. Right? This is why America has spent such a long time keeping the Negro in his place. What I am trying to suggest to you is that it was not an accident. It was not an act of God. It was not done by well-meaning people muddling into something which they didn't understand. It was deliberate, right? Deliberate means on purpose, right? It was deliberate, right? Policy hammered into place in order to make money from Black flesh. And now in 1963, because we have never faced this fact, we are in intolerable trouble, right? So he's talking about the idea of slavery, the concept of slavery brought Black men and women over as cheap labor, right? And in order to make them work, they he talks about this later. You know, they had to be beaten and threatened with their lives in order to subjugate them. And he said, we have never, but in order to do that, they couldn't look at this other person who clearly is a human being, just a darker skin color, and say, you're human. They had to think of that as an animal. There was actually a percentage. They said that Black people were 3/5 of human, not and 2/5 animal. So we were technically considered a hybrid. I'm just going to move to this middle part, which is where James Baldwin begins reframing or changing how he sees himself and saying, if we go back to the earlier part where he's saying, you know, that child that grows up with the idea and we go to school and they have a pledge allegiance to the flag as little kids, and we talk about liberty and justice for all. And then that kid lives around, leaves his neighborhood and sees a whole different experience. And then begins to understand himself differently, right? Starts to understand this idea, there's something that's not making sense. Now, I'm going to go back to Sojourner Truth. She was like, hold it a minute. If you say women are supposed to be treated like this, and like this, how come you're not treating me like that? And am I not a woman, right? Ain't I a woman? So she kind of will do that. So James Baldwin's doing a parallel. He's doing it a lot more systematically. But basically he's saying, okay, let's just go to this idea. Liberty and justice for all. Yet there's some of us that don't feel that you don't have to even be that intellectual. You can just have your lived experience and you will see it, right? And you know, and I can speak of myself, like I grew up in projects in the Bronx. And once I left that and we went down to Radio City Music Hall, we could see the difference, right, between that neighborhood and the neighborhood in which I lived. So he says any child understands that difference. You understand there is a sense. They may not be able to put the word equality to it, but it's a lived experience, right? And then it says again, this idea of inequality is because, you know, if anybody, and this is, you know, we can get into a bigger discussion, but bigger meaning not only in terms of race, but in terms of just interpersonal relationships, you know, and I'll get to that in a minute. I think because I think it's important to give it that connection. But then he says once you have this realization, you could either take on this idea, right, that you are not, you know, a full human being, that you're not worth, you know, all of the beautiful things that are laid out in the world, you know, particularly here in America, that if you go to a nice neighborhood, that you should live that way too, that all neighborhoods should be nice. You know what I mean? If you start to push against that and question that, you start to see yourself differently. You start to see yourself beyond the story that is being imposed on you about who you are. So here's this moment in the speech that, you know, is, whoops, I made it too big. He says, this is James Baldwin talking, right? In order for me to live, I decided very early that some mistake had been made somewhere. I was not a nigger, even though you called me one. But if I was a nigger in your eyes, there was something about you. There was something you needed, right? I had to realize when I was very young that I was none of the things I was told that I was. I was not, for example, happy. I never touched a watermelon for all kinds of reasons that had been invented by white people. And I knew enough about life by this time to understand that whatever you invent, whatever you project is you. So where we are now is that a whole country of people believe that I'm a nigger, and I don't. And the battle's on. Because if I am not what I've been told I am, then it means that you're not what you thought you were either. And that is the crisis. So I'm going to go back here. So where are we now? Is that a whole country of people believe that I'm a nigger and I don't, right? I don't believe it, he says. And the battle's on. Because if I'm not what I've been told I am, then it means that you're not what you thought you were either. And that is the crisis, right? So I'm going to stop sharing. I'll come back to the essay. There's a flip that he's doing, right? He says, okay, you say this is who I am, and I know, and I don't agree. That's not who I am. And then he says, if I'm not who I am, right? Because I know I've learned this through my life, through my experience, through just my living and my being, right? Because if I'm not what I've been told that I am, right, then it means that you're not what you thought you were either, and that is right. So, what do you think he is saying that? What do you think he means that if I'm not who I thought who I am, who I've been told who I am, then you're not who you are either? What do you think that means?
That white don't rule the world.
Say it again.
That white don't rule the world.
Yeah, right. Or that whatever idea you have about yourself, right, it's probably wrong as well. Right.
Like
And
to
so that,
belittle somebody to yourself.
say it again.
Sorry. Like to belittle somebody to bigger yourself.
Yes, right. That could be an activity you do that in order to feel for yourself, and that means that are you bigger? Then you probably are not bigger, right? You think you need to make yourself bigger by doing that, then you're probably not a big person. So this idea that you have of me, this idea that you have of yourself, are wrong. So you're wrong either way.
I think it's like him trying to convince him and the person he's calling that he's bigger. Because he don't really necessarily believe in either. So you know how you gotta make yourself believe. That's what they do.
Well, you know, it's powerful, you know, what you said, David, when you said make yourself believe, right? Because like, what do you use to make yourself believe? Like, what information are you using, right? Are you using something that somebody's trying to tell you you are? Are you trying to use more information? I mean, we know we can, you know, we're, as human beings, we can feel, right? And we can think. And like you said, even if you think objectively, like if you're, you know, I'll just use myself as an example. You know, when I lived in the projects and, you know, 639 Rosedale Avenue, the Soundproof projects in the Bronx, and we took the bus, the 27 bus, to the number 6 train, and we got on the number 6 train and went downtown to Radio City just to look at the ice skating rink and walk around those areas. We knew that the people that lived down in those areas were living in a different place. And this is me as a child, and that's what he's making that understanding. So there is a level that we can just see, follow the action. This woman used to tell me, a very wise woman. She goes, sometimes you could hear what people say, but then follow the action and see what they do. So if we look at society, and in that clip, he was saying something similar, right? In the clip, he was saying, you know, we could sit here and talk about philosophy, but let me tell you, when I, you know, I could look at the streets I live in, you know, I could look at, you know, the conditions that I live in. I look at the conditions of the schools. I see the difference between the textbooks that my children get in Harlem as opposed to other places, and I could see that there's a difference. So you might say that everything's equal, but if things are equal, like Sojourner Truth says, if women are treating an example of being respectful to women is that you treat them well, then why don't you treat me respectfully? Why don't you help me? Why don't you lay down a coat over a puddle so that I don't get my shoes dirty? Right? You're not doing that for me. So there is a sense of being seen a different way. I just saw something in the chat. I want to say, Jalan was saying, and I in a woman, how does repeating the phrase connects to the passage, and how does it reflect the idea of women and equality? What do you think? Let's pause for a minute because there's a lot of info coming in, and it's 2:00, right? So we can take a little break to digest. Or I have an idea. Let's just so Jalan posed the question, in I Women, how does repeating the phrase connects to the passage. Let's just stop there, right? What do you think? What do folks think? How did that the repetition of the phrase, right? And we could say with James Baldwin, if we repeat like the idea of a nigger, I'm not a nigger. You may say it, I'm not. That's not who I am. I disagree with what you say, right? The idea of repeating that, and she says, "Ain't I a woman? Ain't I a woman?" You say this, and ain't I a woman, right? She talks about strength too. Like you try to say that men are stronger. She goes, "I could eat as much. I could work as hard. I could do this. Ain't I a woman?" Right? So what do you think the repetition of the phrase "ain't I a woman" does in the passage?
I think she's using that as making up each day words of how to think of women, so they don't treat every woman that way.
Say that one more time, David. It was a little muffled.
I feel like she's using it in a way of making up each their own words and saying supposedly treat women this way, and not every woman, every different color woman in the same way.
Yeah, well, the repetition of it, right? And at the it's the some very
She's kind
often
of
you think.
like sarcastic, kind of like with it, right?
Say it again.
Like sarcastic would be the word.
Yeah, I would say that there's sarcastic or even irony, right? She's like, if
Yeah, I'll
there's
start
all
first.
these.
I wanted to chime in on that as well.
Sure.
With that phrase, "ain't I a woman?" I feel like even with us women, we say that like, aren't we enough? Aren't we the best? Aren't we stronger? Aren't we just as much respected as the men?
hmm
That's kind of how I got it.
Right. That's with all this. Every time she says "ain't I a woman," she's using it as in different ways to make the argument, right, and to counter, right, to give a different view of how she's seen, right. We talked about that she we talked about the idea that she was saying if women are to be treated well, and ain't I a woman, sometimes the idea of women are weak, but she says, I could work as hard as a man, and I could eat as much as a man, and ain't I a woman? And then she says, if you say that, in terms of women are not important, if you use religion, and she'll say this, she goes, so every time she goes to the idea of ain't I a woman, it's like really kind of making the point of that she's just as strong, just as um, smart, or even smart. What does that even have to do with it? She's challenging the ideas of how she's seen, right? Either positives and the negatives of how she's seen, she's countering that image. And James Baldwin is doing a similar thing, right? Like he's talking about he's countering the image, right? That if you see me as such, and if you see me as this idea of, oh goodness, my phone died. Sorry, I was trying to use my the hotspot on my phone to deal with this internet stuff to see if that helped, but my phone, the battery just died, so I think I'm on the houses thing again. So hold on 1 second. I'm going to try to close some applications and things to see if that helps us expand with here. Just bear with me 1 second while we navigate technology, and then we'll get back to. But just hold that idea of us being that basically what what the two essays are doing, right? And that's the idea of the comparison, is looking at the ways in which both James Baldwin and Sojourner Truth are challenging society's views of who they are, right? That if people are saying X, Y, and Z, and this is who they think I am, or who you say I am, right? I'm having a lived experience that is different, and that yeah, okay, thank you. Glad you can hear me. There's a little bit of a, yeah, let me try that in a moment. Thank you for your support and suggestions in the chat. I'm gonna turn the camera off for a minute. So Yeah, so kind of like seeing how they're both challenging the way in which we are being seen, right? They're challenging the way in which society sees them and changing the way they either agree or disagree with the way in which society is seeing them, right? Um, let me, so he does that whole idea, right? Um, but we could say that, right? We could say, I think I want to go toward the end of it, and I'm just having a thought. This is what we're gonna do. I'm just gonna come in for a minute and maybe this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna ask us if we could power through for another 10 minutes, and so, or whatever till for another 10 minutes, because I'm gonna just talk about the ending of a talk to teacher and talk to teachers, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit about the and then talk a little bit about the final essay, and then I think I'll let us go early today, only because we're not we're having a lot of I'm having a lot of issues with being able to communicate today. So I apologize. The technology is not cooperating with me. I don't know if it's the clouds over me right now, but um, so we'll do that. So let's just, so bear with me. I was going to go for a break, but I figure it's already after 2. So if we just go for another 10 minutes, I think I can just speak about the ending of the essay. I want to open it up for any thoughts or reflections. We will continue and work with these essays next week. And the only assignment you will have to do is to do the essay that we set up last week on Jesmyn Ward and Carol Anderson. And and that will be due instead of Thursday, in case you joined class later. Instead of Thursday, it was going to be due on Sunday. And then also I'm going to work this week to finish the grading, and then next week you'll get a chart of information. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the end of the essay because I think it's important. There's more. We'll do some more in the essay next week, but I want to go to today I want to get us go to the end of it. Right. So so he talks about this idea, right, that throughout the whole essay, he's talking about how important it is that this child, right, if we talk about, because we're talking to teachers, will learn and understand that there is a difference, right, and that there is also like an illusion, both in 2 ways. One, in being told liberty and justice for all, but not feeling the liberty and justice, and also being felt to feel like you are a lesser, unworthy uh, human being, but then knowing and having the experience that that's not true. I know my worth. I'm learning my worth. Once I learn my worth, now we got to deal with it. And again, if society or the power structure or white America has this idea, or the idea of white supremacy, like I am white, therefore, if whiteness therefore makes you supreme or powerful, he's saying that's not true either. Because in order for you to feel powerful, you have to do all this shit to other people in order to be powerful, and that's not really being powerful, right? So he says, so then he kind of ends and says that if he was a teacher, what he would do, right? He says, and he's speaking to the child, right? He says, and I'm going to start here. He says more. He says here, I would try to make each child know that these things are results of a criminal conspiracy to destroy them. I would teach him that if he intends to get to be a man, he must once decide that he is stronger than this conspiracy and that he must never make peace with it, right? And that one of his weapons for refusing to make peace with it and for destroying it depends on what he decides he is worth, right? Decide what you are worth, and then decide to understand that, live it, to counter it, and to hold that up, right? I would teach him that there are currently very few standards in this country which are worth a man's respect, that it is up to him to begin to change these standards for the sake of the life and the health of this country. I would suggest to him that the popular culture, as represented, for example, on television and in comic books and in movies, is based on fantasies created by very ill people, and he must be aware that they are fantasies that have nothing to do with reality. Like these ideas, right? I would teach him that the press he reads is not as free as it says it is, and that he can do something about that too. I would try to make him know that just as American history is longer, larger, more various, and more beautiful, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it, so is the world larger, more daring, more beautiful, more terrible, but principally larger, and that it belongs to him. I would teach him that he doesn't have to be bound by the experiences of any given administration, any given policy, any morality, that he has the right and the necessity to examine everything. I would try to show him that one has not learned anything about Castro when he says he is a communist. This is the way of his learning something about Castro, something about Cuba, something in time about the world. I would suggest to him that he is living at the moment in an enormous province. America is not the world, and if the America is going to become a nation, she must find a way, and this child must help her find a way to use the tremendous potential and tremendous energy which this child represents. If this country does not find a way to use that energy, it will be destroyed by that energy. So, so the ending, he ends in this kind of big kind of crescendo of ideas, but basically he's saying that, but once we have this realization, right, that we should live, right, inside of the work of our value, we should live that, and that we should, in the beginning, he says you're going to receive opposition, right, from the power structure because they don't want you being powerful. They want, because the way in which their power is based on your subjugation, right? So he talks about this, and at the end, basically that last line, he says there's an opportunity here, right? America, in this case, America. He's saying that America is not the world. First of all, he says, remember, the world is much bigger than this country. So so that there is more, right? Because that's what happens in that clip. He said, I left here in 1948. Like he left America because he just couldn't deal with it in 1948. But then he comes back to continue writing and fighting, right? But he says there's an opportunity here. And the opportunity is that let's just agree that, that you're powerful, that let's say for himself that I'm powerful and I'm strong and you're not who you say you are. So let's deal with that crisis. And that is a place from which America can grow. And then he says, I would tell that student because what will happen is that is the place where change can happen, where growth can happen. And if not, right, that energy, that realization that this child, us, me, you, we're the children, has about our self-worth, it could grow, right? And I just want to use his words, right? That talks about the potential, right? If America is going to become a nation, she must find a way, and this child must help her find a way to use the tremendous potential and tremendous energy what this child represents, like what we represent, right? So if this country does not find a way to use the energy, it will be destroyed by that energy, right? Because once the realization is there, then it's just a battle, right? And so, so James Baldwin, I think this was published in '68, but he said delivered it in 1963. If we think about, and I know this is dense, so that's why we'll do this over 2 weeks, and I'll let you work on something else, and we can come back to this. So there is this idea saying that there's an opportunity that now that there is this realization, we saw this in 2020 with Black Lives Matter when that became international, right? That there's this idea that we matter, that our lives are worthy of everything, that all of the good things that happen for everybody should happen to everybody and not to just some. That once we come to that realization, that we should all come together and say, let's figure out how we're going to make this work, because you're worthy, I'm worthy, we're worthy. As long as there isn't that coming together, that energy is already in motion, and so that America has an opportunity to work with the energy and build and become a strong nation, or it can be destroyed by that energy. So on that note, we'll stop and pause. And I'll see if there's any thoughts or questions about everything or anything that I've said today from the works, the text that we had.
May I just give a couple of my own ideas real
Sure.
briefly? Yeah, so without going into my own personal politics too much, I just wanted to say that this text that we're reading from James Baldwin was very foundational for me because I too read it in a similar time that everyone here did, and like it was my beginning exposure to more radical politics and to also like Black literature because you know in high school you're not really given opportunities to read a lot of literature outside of praising the status quo. So to read someone like James Baldwin, um, I was very like just blown away. Like I was like, wow, someone's saying something that I've always thought about, but I've never quite been able to articulate. And you know, I'm sure a lot of you also kind of had an epiphany while reading this, and I hope you did. If you didn't, it's totally cool. Everyone has, you know, their different moments to learn things and grow, or whatever. But I hope that you know, reading Baldwin and other Black authors that your professor is providing to you, because it's amazing that you guys are doing this, also allows you to look for other Black authors and literature written by other radicals who are not afraid to kind of speak the truth of like the plight of the white liberal, or you know speak the truth of, you know, how we're exploited and how the exploitation, you know, creates more poverty and stuff. So very interesting topic, and I love everything I saw in the chat too.
Thank you all. Thank you for that, Victor, and thank you all. If anybody else want to say a comment or share any thoughts? In chat. Thank you all for putting your information. I think Jalan, yeah, I think when in talking about the repetition, we ended up talking about the second part of your question, right? How it really is, every time she repeats it, is another affirmation of the equality that women have in terms of, in this case, we're talking about gender, right? In terms of the idea of gender. So we will continue with these texts. If you, now that we've read them through, I encourage you, if anything else, you know, the Sojourner Truth one is very short and we did a video, but definitely if you can read the James Baldwin one again, if you have time to do that, I encourage you to read it. We'll continue talking a little bit about these texts next week. We will set up the assignment next week, and then we'll switch gears and jump into some work on the research paper that we're going to do, the annotated bibliography, which will be your research project. So we'll talk about that and go through the nuts and bolts, and then you basically will have most of the information you need to complete the semester, and we'll follow up with all the things that I said. Okay, any questions or final comments? Okay, if not,
The essay that's due Sunday, is it up?
yes, it's up. Yeah, let me actually, let me just,
I don't see it.
okay, let me show it to you. Actually, let me move it maybe to the top. So let me share my screen. And while I'm here, I'll make the change to you all as well. Go to course discussions.
Professor, I also wanted to ask as well, the paper that you wanted us to revise, like to fix, is that due anytime soon? Because I have it, I just didn't know how to submit it.
Yes, so let me send an email on all of that, because I think I'm gonna create the system. Meaning there was one revisions that were done that were attached to the current assignment. But I think for clarity's sake, I'm gonna just open a separate window and call it, and then I'm gonna give you the ways to submit your revisions into one place, and how to label them. But so just stay tuned for that. Who was that? Ariel? Who asked me that?
That was me, Ariel. Yes, Professor.
Yes. Okay. I was just could tell by your voice, so it's like I didn't want to be wrong. And so David, if everybody can see it, this is now here. I'm gonna, while we do it, I'll fix it live. I'm gonna edit it. Okay, and I'm gonna change the due date to So we have it there. Okay, so now it's there. The instructions are there, the essays are there, and they moved the due date to the 14th. Any other questions or clarifications? Yes, Paulo Freire. I mean, if you yes, it's a good thing you mentioned him. I'm going to speak about him next class a little bit, Victor, because I think the prompt for the
That's
next
so
one,
cool. Sorry, go ahead.
the prompt for the next one includes a phrase from him. So, so we'll talk a little bit about him too. So right on.
Yes, awesome. We're
Yeah.
getting students to think about praxis and think about other stuff that is outside of the status quo. Thank you, Professor. It's awesome.
And Victor put in the chat again, and let me just that if you want to book him, there's a email to email Victor. That's Victor's email, so you can reach them there. And then there is also a link to connect to the OSA Center if you want to book some time, because we have this particularly. It's good. I want to also urge, as you're thinking about revisions, that you can take your work and go to the writing center and work with Victor or work with another person, but you'll be able to book time to get support with your revision. And then of course you can always make appointments with me as well. So, okay. Any other questions? Victor says they like to work on revision, so.
You said his email is going to be where?
Say it again.
His email is going to be where?
Oh, it's in the chat. Victor's email, he put it in the chat. I'm copying the link, and I have Victor's email as well. So I can when I send you all the summary email of the assignments and all that, I can include Victor's email and this link that they sent to us. Okay. Any other questions?
Not a question. I just want to say, if you do email me, I'm totally acceptable to see students on the weekends. But try to email me earlier than later. So like Thursday by 8 p.m. is the best time to reach me, or before that. Because on Fridays, if I already have it scheduled with you, I typically take Friday and just do whatever. So yeah. And also put your class in the description. That's very important. Oh yeah.
All right. Okay. So if that's all we have, then have a great afternoon. Thank you for your attention and for your work. And I'll see you all next week, Tuesday. Have a good day.
I have a quick question.
Yes, Nahum.
Yeah, I don't know if someone texted me in the chat. I just want to make sure about what assignments we'll do next week. You said the essay, right? You changed to
On
Sunday.
Sunday. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you, Jalan. Have a good day too. Take care, Ariel. Take care, Giancarlo. Isla. David. Take care, everybody.